Welcome to episode 168 of the Confidence Through Health podcast. In this episode, I interview Dr. Alona Pulde and Dr. Matthew Lederman, and they are the physicians behind the documentary Forks Over Knives. They have a new book out, Wellness to Wonderful. We talk about why wonderful and not wellness. We dig into their 9 pillars that they've identified to have a wonderful life and how it's important to have balance in as many of those as possible. And so we talk about what are those pillars? How do we get to wonderful? It's more than just diet and exercise, and how they all interact with each other, and how connecting with each other and with ourselves is a huge piece of the puzzle that so many of us are neglecting in the time frame that we need to do it. We may do it in a short period of time. We may do it when we go on vacation. Or we may not do it at all. And so we talked about ways to start doing that. We talked about why it's important to do that. And we talk a little bit about nutrition, but mostly it's about how do we get to wonderful, and nutrition, diet, exercise, sleep, self-care. These are all pieces of the puzzle that we need to spend time on. And so we talk about that, and it's a great conversation. I had a lot of fun with it, and I think you're going to learn a lot of tips and steps to get yourself over the hump from maybe the life that you're at to a more wonderful life. So I want to thank you, Alona and Matthew, for being guests on the Confidence Through Health podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
So y'all have had some great success with Forks Over Knives, and now you've got a new book, Wellness to Wonderful, that's out. And so why the book, and why go from Forks Over Knives to something that's a little bit more like the wonderful aspect, I'm assuming, is a little bit more in depth than just like, what do you feed yourself?
Yeah. I think Matt and I are very curious beings. That's what kind of, we're regularly looking at how do we optimize our experience in life? How do we improve our health and wellness? And that's what led us to nutrition and lifestyle in the first place, saying that, that the conventional medical world was not providing healing in the way that we desired. And, so we worked on our sleep and on our exercise and on our nutrition, and we really optimized those areas, but noticed that there were still lingering things that didn't quite feel great or optimized.
Right.
And, we like to think in a world of infinite possibilities, I want my life to be wonderful, and it can be wonderful. So what are the additional steps that I need to take to do that? Yeah. And that's what brought us to our 9 pillars of Wellness to Wonderful, is these pillars all play a role separately and integrate together to elevate that life experience, so that you not only get health and longevity, which a lot of us know how to do, but you get health, longevity, and you can do that with greater joy, with really experiencing greater joy.
And I think you said something that's really important that I think a lot of people struggle with is, in it, like I've even told people when they come to me as a potential client for nutrition help or something, it's like, okay, well, I can give you the perfect meal plan to set you up, and like, you can go to the grocery store, buy these things tomorrow, eat this way, and you'll be healthy. Right? Like, over time, obviously, it's not going to happen in a 24-hour period, but if you follow this, you'll be healthy. But, and there's so much information out there that guides you in that same way. But like you said, there's so much more to finding the true wonderful side of life. And like, it's more than just eat this and get your body to feel right, because your brain's involved.
Yeah. A lot of people think about diet. Diet is so important. It's a foundation. What we put in our mouths, we put in our bodies 3 times or more a day. So important. But then there's 2 issues. There's some diseases and symptoms that don't necessarily improve just with diet alone.
Right.
And the stuff that's our top killers, diet is right there, right? Yeah. Heart disease, diabetes, cancer. But then there's other issues that can persist. People can have chronic pain. People can have chronic fatigue. People can have trouble sleeping. People can have all sorts of mental health issues with anxiety and depression and the range there. So there's more to health than diet, but diet hits a lot, right? So then the question is, okay, how do we deal with all of those health issues? And then there's another thing. Okay, great. We've reversed all of my problems, but now where am I? Right. So in other words, instead of just trying to get back to a baseline of neutral, what about going all the way to wonderful? And that's, again, it's, to me, a lot of problems are like, if you were wearing tight shoes all day, all of a sudden, the American diet is like putting tight shoes on us, and it's causing us all this fatigue and pain and discomfort. If all of a sudden someone comes to you and you tell them, well, take off those shoes and wear these shoes, that's the relief of all this pain and disease and inflammation. But is that really making life wonderful? You see the difference there?
Oh, yeah.
So now we got to do things to beyond just removing the tight shoes. And I think that's what the goal of the book here is. Hey, we got to get rid of the tight shoes. We got to address those. But now can we make life more wonderful as well?
So is that maybe one of the reasons why a lot of people will find success with a specific diet or, nutrition plan. And so they'll lose the weight that they wanted to lose. They'll get healthier. But then once they get to that spot, they don't know what else to do. And they sort of just get stuck. And then they start gaining everything back because they were confused and didn't know what else to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Absolutely. It's really hard to sustain. And if we're tunnel visioned, because we are whole comprehensive people. And it's like, I look at treating my health with diet alone, similarly to the siloing that sometimes happens in conventional medicine. I'm a kidney doctor, or I'm a liver doctor, I'm a heart doctor. It's very similar. We are not just a diet plan. Our sleep is important. Our movement is important. Our connection to ourselves and to the world around us is important. All of those contribute to our dietary decisions. So what happens often when we embark on a nutrition plan is we're really excited and we're motivated and we're using a whole lot of willpower to drive us in the direction we want to go.
Right.
But by not addressing those other pillars, at some point that willpower, that novel excitement around a new plan withers, and we don't have the support of those other pillars to internally motivate us to continue and drive us toward that health.
Right. So these 9 pillars, are they things that we should all be attacking all the time? Or is it like start here and then like once you get comfortable, add this one, sort of like building a house, right? You do the foundation first, you let it set, and then you start building the rest of the stuff.
Well, it's to me, we use the word like tending to them. It's checking in on them, right? And then it's like, imagine having 9 kids and you can't, hold all 9 at the same time.
Right.
You want to care for all 9. You want to let all 9 know that, hey, we're here, but who's needing the most attention? All right, there's one of my kids fell down the steps. The other one needs me to help them with their homework. Right. I'm going to focus on the kid that fell down the steps right now, tend to them. But I'm going to let the kid know, hey, we'll be over there with your homework in a little bit, right? So to me, that's the way to think about this, and that you don't get to a place where your kids are all fine and you just can stop thinking about them, and then everything's going to be great. You're constantly for the rest. And my dad tells me, I said, oh, once my kids are off in college, and then things will be great. Oh no, he's like, no, don't. That's not the end. And then I'll say, oh, once they're married, things. But he's like, no, Matt, everybody's married. I'm still worrying about that. So it turns out that he's never going to stop tending to us no matter what happens. And to me, on the flip side, the tending is where a lot of the joy comes from. So it's not that all of a sudden you're sleeping and then it's actually just checking in and caring for that. And then, yes, getting sleep does feel wonderful, but just checking in on all these is really helpful too.
Yeah. I think the other piece of that is that because they're integrated, tending on one has effects on the others. Okay. So for example, if I am not getting enough sleep, right? then my connection to my family and to my friends and at work is going to be, I'm going to be more apt to be irritable. I'm going to be more apt to snap, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to make potentially less healthy food choices.
Right.
And that's scientifically shown to be true, where people consume 30 to 40% more junk food when they're not adequately sleeping. So by getting enough sleep, I can increase the likelihood that I'm going to connect to the world around me with more compassion and kindness and joy. I'm going to eat better. I'm going to be motivated because I'm not as tired to actually get movement into the day. So you see how just one of those then affects all of the other ones as well.
Right.
So you don't have to actively be individually taking care of each of these.
Right. And that's very similar. One of the things that I tell people is that, like, okay, if we just focus on one thing as far as your health, like focus on your nutrition first. If you start eating better, your body's going to tell you, I want to start moving. Yes. Like, it's going to be a natural, like, oh, you're feeding me these things that I need that are going to help me move better. So let's go do some sort of exercise. Which brings up the point that I haven't had a chance to read your book yet. I got a copy of it, but I haven't had a chance to read it, but I was skimming through it, and you mentioned is like play instead of exercise is like and I love that, like, description of like moving your body and getting out, and like, as opposed to, because a lot of people hear exercise and they just think, oh yeah, I know I'm supposed to exercise, da, da, da. But when you think about it as like, oh, go do something that's fun. You're still moving your body, but it's fun. It's playful. That's a big change, I think, in the brain chemistry of how you approach doing something, right?
Yeah, I've been in both camps, right? I've been where I got to exercise, and it's more of a push, and I'm pretty driven, so sometimes I don't even realize how much I'm pushing myself.
Right.
But when I do bring play and connection, so the more pillars I can bring into the picture, the more joyful that experience is. So, for example, I would play freeze tag with my daughter and her friends after school before I picked her up. And, and we would run around, and there's connection and there's play. And it was a really wonderful time. And I'm all sweaty. I didn't even realize. And then all of a sudden I'm sore in places I wasn't sore before, because I'm like all the quick movements and, and I said, oh, wow, that was exercise too, and even though I came at it thinking I was just playing, and then I looked at all the other pillars, and I'm like, wow. So then if I said, hey, would I rather go and be on the elliptical machine or go play freeze tag for 30 minutes with my daughter after school? And she was so excited, right? She was still at the age where she loved dad being around and playing with her friends, and they all had so much fun. It's a no-brainer, right? It's so easy, right?
Yeah. And like the connection piece, the one thing that I keep thinking of when you mention that is that's such a key when it comes to longevity, right? Like, granted, we have to have a healthy body to get us to the older years of our lives, but if that's the goal of life, is to live long and help people and be a part of society and experience all these wonderful things, that connection piece is a huge commonality. When you look at the blue zones, when you look at people that live long lives, they always have a tight connection of a group of people, whether it's 3 people or a whole community of 50 or 100 people that they live in, but they are connected to people.
Right. And that's when we think about connection, we think about a couple of ways. We use the foundation of nonviolent communication, which is really, we talk about that in the book. And that's essentially where you transform what you say, how you think, and what you do, so that your actions bring you closer together to the people around you in this world, right? So it's a real deep process of touching into your authenticity and being able to share it with other people. And also not just when things are working and you're celebrating, but also when things aren't working for you. A lot of people are used to suppressing those so that they can stay in this state of artificial harmony to avoid conflict. But not only is that uncomfortable and just, spiritually and emotionally uncomfortable, right? It actually has been shown, and we talk about this in Wellness to Wonderful as well, where you increase inflammation you turn on pro-inflammatory pathways when you are in that state of isolation or suppression.
Right.
Yeah. And it's really fascinating because it's the same pro-inflammatory cytokines, the same adrenaline and cortisol, the same changes in blood flow to different parts of the body that are less health promoting to be living in those states, similar to what an unhealthy diet or sedentary lifestyle does.
And saying that, going back to how you compared like movement and play to regimented exercise, similarly, when we can discern in our bodies what actually meets our needs in a way, like, so that exercise, that formal, when we mobilize and say, I have to run today, I have to get to the gym today, we're in that state of mobilization and fight or flight. We may get to a healthier state, we may contribute to longevity, but we are not doing that with joy. So when we can shift that around to say, I can actually go to the park and pick up a game of basketball or play soccer, or I can go for a walk with a friend, or I can go swimming in the pool, or whatever that is that actually makes me happy, or connect things together, you know, like people who love to read and can get on a stationary bike and read a book, you know, and put those two things together where it brings them joy. And that is the internal motivator that keeps us going in that direction. That's a lot of the stuff we naturally see in areas in the blue zones is they meet their needs in a way that also provides joyous effect. Right.
And I could totally, now that the way you put it, I can totally see that being like, I have to go to the gym, or especially if it's something that you put on your calendar, because you don't want to forget it. You don't want to miss out on it. You don't want to, but then it becomes a very regimented, you know, and it's hard to find joy sometimes in, because it's like, I have to do this. Like when you put that versus like, I want to go do this. Like, I want to go spend time outside, you know, gardening or whatever it is that, like, you know, because I'm a firm believer in getting your hands dirty, getting in the dirt, getting into nature, because that helps as well. You know, and that's part of the experience piece for me. When I go to the park or go to work in my garden, it's, yes, I'm doing something that, like in gardening, for instance, I'm doing something that's going to produce crops in the future. It's going to help me with my health and But in the moment, I'm like, I like to listen to the birds. I like to, you know, hear the different sounds of nature that are going on. When there's not, you know, a construction truck or something driving by, of course. But you know, I try to connect with those things. And I think that's something that's another step that people miss, is that not just connecting with people, but connecting with the world around us.
Yeah, that's one of the 9 pillars, is the natural world, all other life on this planet. And like you said, it's not just doing it to do it, but it's connecting to it. And that's what's really hard to convey in a book or even on a podcast like this, right? That the quality of connection, but everybody knows what we're talking about, because when they feel it, they feel it, right? So that connection with someone else, where it's this tender softening, this quality of connection with somebody else, or like when you're just getting the gardening done because you have to, versus I'm there and I'm feeling the sun and I'm breathing the fresh air and I'm hearing the birds and I'm noticing what it feels like in my body, and there's a softening and a relaxation. Right. That's the experience. And that's why 2 people can do gardening, and one, it can be health promoting, and one, it can be potentially pro-inflammatory, because they're just checking it off the list and they're forcing themselves to do it. Right. So that ability to check in and say, what do I like? Right. And that's where we talk about nonviolent communication, connecting to your feelings and needs. Yeah. And needs are universal. We all have the same needs, right? So we all have a need for love and safety and health and, you know, well-being. Right. So but there's lots of ways to meet those needs, right? For you, meeting your need for health might be running 50 miles this week. Right. That might not only just be meeting your need for health, it might also be meeting your need for self-care and for pleasure. And maybe you listen to a book and audiobook and you're learning. So there's all sorts of needs that can be met. Right. But when we connect to the needs, then we can be expansive with the strategies we use to meet those needs. So in fact, we talk about, instead of creating a to-do list, which is about strategies, It's to create a to needs list. And hey, I have a need to contribute to my children or connect with my children. So connection is a need.
Right.
Okay, well, what do I feel like in this moment? And what I thought I was going to do last night, I'm not really feeling that this morning, but I still want to connect, but I don't want to do that strategy. Can we come up with another strategy? That self-connection, that exercise is what helps make life more wonderful versus doing it or not doing it because it's on your list. That is going to make life worse, but not only worse and unhappy, it's actually, and that's what we talk about in Wellness to Wonderful, it's actually pro-inflammatory. When you force yourself to do something that your body is resisting, that is a physiological state that stimulates sympathetics and pro-inflammatory mechanisms. So it's really fascinating.
Yeah. And I'm just going to put a caveat on there because people hear that and they're like, well, there are things that I have to do. Like, I don't like doing the housework and I don't like doing cleaning and so I don't like movement, whatever that is. But what happens is what we don't like is the strategies. I have to do that right now because like Matt said, we do all have a need to contribute. We do all have a need for movement. And for people who think that's not true, like try lying in bed for days on end and not getting out of it, you're going to go crazy. Yeah. You want to move. Your body naturally wants to move. And not contributing feels bad in our systems, right? When we contribute, we do get that sense of joy. And it doesn't mean maybe I don't have to do the dishes tonight. Maybe if I tell my family, hey, I'm not feeling up to it, but the dishes, it would be lovely if they get done. Would anybody be willing to contribute? And so all of a sudden we expand the ways that we can meet that need.
And that's what we teach, because it's so important to put all these skills together if you really want to experience a wonderful life.
Right.
So when somebody checks in and says, they just know, like the first step is to notice that I have a thought that I have, there's things I just have to do. When you have that thought, you're disconnected from sort of your life energy, yourself, right?
Right.
It doesn't mean just drop everything. It means, hey, let's pause. Let's learn what's going on here. And then we take people through that exercise of saying, right now I'm telling myself I have to do dishes and no one else is going to do them and the house is going to be a mess and nobody really cares about my needs. So even if I brought it up, it's going to be a lot of work to try and get someone else to do them. Right. So those are all the thoughts that keep us in that mindset versus coming at it from a place of choice and freedom, which is I'm choosing to do the dishes because it's right now I can't think of a strategy where the dishes will get done and it's not a ton of work of like begging my kids or partner to do it.
Right.
And I don't want to live bugs all over the place so that we have dishes in the sink for 10 days.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm choosing to do the dishes. Okay, great. Now, when you come at it from choice, already your energy shifts. Yeah. But then is there another way? Is there a way to connect to your partner and your children and say, I don't want you to feel forced to do dishes, but I'm noticing I'm doing them and I'm not really enjoying it either. I'm wondering if there's a way to get these dishes done and keep the house clean, because I know we all value order and cleanliness. See, I got to the need there, right?
Right.
We all value order and cleanliness. Does anybody have any thoughts around sort of first, can you tell me sort of what comes up for you when you hear me share this?
Yeah.
Right. Do you get nervous that you're going to have to do dishes? Do you worry that I'm really angry and resentful and I'm judging you? Right. So let's connect. And that's where we use the word connection. Let's connect around what's coming up before we decide the strategy, which means what are we going to do with the dishes? Let's just connect around what's going on. That connection now creates a state of physiological change in my body. So when I connect with you, my body feels safer. The parasympathetics come on. That releases actually anti-inflammatory pathways or stimulates. So just by connecting, we've caused a physiological shift in our body, and we're starting to head down that path of life is more wonderful. We connect to our choice and freedom, and they're probably happier because deep down they know we're upset and resentful that we're doing dishes for the last 10 years. Right. Do you see how that all works and comes together? Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. Like, and what I'm envisioning is that you're taking it away from the immediate, I'm in fight or flight because I've got to do the dishes and I really don't want to. And so I'm going to get upset about it. Or, I'm going to have to do them and be huffing and puffing while about it. Or I'm going to blow up at everybody because somebody needs to do the dishes. And so it's taking that step back and go, wait, don't go there. Come back. how can we connect as a group to figure this out versus me just going on the defensive because,
Exactly.
while it's the dishes aren't attacking me, the fact that I look at them and it's getting, they're exploding as far as taking over the sink, that's attacking, my vision of a clean house, And so, yeah, that totally makes sense. And I think that, and I see that not just from a, like my life is more wonderful
Right.
from a health standpoint, but also from just a stress level and an enjoyment of your family life.
Yes.
If it's not just the dishes, but any activity in the household that I think oftentimes, from my own experience growing up, I work really hard with my wife to make sure that we avoid this because growing up, my parents fought a lot. And so it's like we saw that and heard that all the time. And it's like in the level of stress in the house, it was very common. I'm the second of five. And for each of us, as soon as we got our driver's license, it was very common for us to be like, can I take the car and go somewhere? Like, can I leave and get away from this explosive stress? And I looking at it, like looking back at it going, okay, well, if we had stopped and talked and communicated, how would that have changed? Because I'm sure it would have changed.
Right. Because your parents have beautiful needs, just like you, the same exact needs that you're trying to meet. And they either don't know how to get them met or they don't know how to do it in a way that collaborates and connects with everybody else.
Right.
So that's the challenge right now is people don't have the skills and the tools to navigate it. So they're left with two choices: suppress my resentment and do the dishes, or blow up at my family.
Right.
But whether it's dishes or anything else, it's suppress what's going on for me or blow up and get into conflict. And most people choose suppression, and then eventually they blow up because they can't suppress anymore.
Right.
Or they withdraw, right? They completely isolate themselves because there's so much internal resentment.
And neither one of those avenues is a way to wonderful.
No, or a way to health or longevity either. I mean, it eats away at us really on a physical level.
So imagine eating all the healthiest foods and great, now you don't have heart disease and diabetes. And now, are you living longer or does it just feel that way? Right? Like, because your life is now pretty uncomfortable. Great. So now I don't have heart disease and diabetes. So I'm around longer just to be more, more in this discomfort, which you felt as a child.
Right.
Right. You knew my guess is you could physically feel it in your body. You talk about the tension.
Oh, yeah.
Right. That tension is the autonomic nervous system turning on and putting you in a physiological state of threat.
Yeah.
That is a pro-inflammatory state. And what happens as children is we learn our bodies become it's almost like a guitar that's tuned a little bit too high. So we actually tune our autonomic nervous systems to be in this state of threat more often. Right. And the good news is we can retune the guitar, but if you're not even aware of this dynamic, you're not even going to know to do that, let alone figure out, let's say, even if you're aware of it, well, where do I go? What do I do?
Yeah.
So that, like you said, that's why we wrote this book. Diet's important, but there's this whole other area or areas that are being overlooked right now that could make dramatic differences in people's lives and health.
Yeah. And the key is we really don't want to be in that fight or flight stage for very long at all. Like, it's there for a reason. It's there to protect us.
Right.
But in one of the things I think everybody has seen videos of, the animals on the Serengeti, they're out there and, the lion or the cheetah comes along and starts to attack and they take off running. And, it's okay. That's the image we all see, right? Fight or flight, the animals trying to get away. But when you watch some of the documentaries that actually look at like the whole picture, and it's like, okay, that lasts for 15 or 20 seconds. And then the antelope gets away and then goes off and starts grazing again.
Yes.
And just like ignores it. And it's like, okay, I made it to safety and everything's calm and everything's fine. Most of us don't ever drop back down to everything's calm and everything's fine, right?
Yes. Yes, that is so valid and true and for a lot of people missed. And that's what happens in that state of resentment, in that state of suppression, repression, in that state of fear or stress, we have now, taken that cheetah or cougar or whatever is coming at us, and it lives in our head and it never shuts off. And every time we do something out of obligation, we perpetuate and reinforce that stress and that, and build up more of that inflammation and that state. And so absolutely. And that's the damage that is happening over time that a lot of us don't connect, and that diet alone won't protect from.
Right. Yeah. Diet will just make your body healthier, like you said, so you could live longer, but you're still going to be in that uncomfortable, stressed state.
Right, you still may be, and diet is super helpful actually at resourcing your body so that it's easier to connect. When I'm eating foods that are processed and fried and oiled and just all sorts of harmful things about the diet, it makes it harder to connect.
Yeah.
Right. So resourcing your body with nutrition and activity and play and sleep increases the chances that you're going to be able to access your connection skills. So I know that when I choose to sleep 5 hours instead of 8 hours because I decided to watch a movie late at night,
right,
I'm choosing to snap more at my kids the next day.
Yeah.
And that responsibility is on me. That's a choice. So to me, the resourcing is not only important for your health in general, it's also important for your ability to connect. And that impacts your life as wonderful. Because when I snap at my kids, I feel terrible.
Right.
And I have a lot of regret. And there's a long cost to that because then I have to repair with my children when they're ready.
Yeah.
I feel, I have my own shame and self-criticism. So there's a huge cost, all that links back to my choice around one of the other pillars.
Right. And one of the things I think a lot of people they're not in tune enough right now to understand is that they can link that back to going, oh, I snapped and did all those things because I didn't get enough sleep.
Instead, and what they do is they try to willpower. They'll say, oh, I really want to, be more patient with my kids. So I just have to be more aware. And they try to, they read an article and they're like, I'm going to be more aware. And then in the moment they snap because in the moment, it's a subconscious reaction,
right?
Which is more likely to be impacted by how much sleep you have than whether your cognitive brain can remember what you read in the article. There's a place for the cognitive brain, right? But mostly it's your reactions.
Yeah.
And the way to improve that is not only to tie it with the brain and the learning, but to resource your body and then to practice these skills. Yeah. So that's what we do. We not only teach people about nutrition and lifestyle at our telehealth clinic, right? At WeHeal.health. We not only teach people about diet and lifestyle, we help them learn these connection skills.
Yeah. And I think that's a key piece that I think people need to hear that you said about this, the reaction piece, the reaction time. One of the things I do, I coach a lot of athletes especially on track and running. And one of the things that I harp on is the muscle memory piece of get your form to be just to where you don't have to think about it. Your form when you're running is perfect because when you get tired, you're going to drop down to the least resistant. Your arms are going to start doing the wrong thing. Your legs aren't going to come up the way they're supposed to. Different things are going to happen. But if your muscle memory is there, you're more inclined to keep the form, which is going to keep you faster and more efficient. And to me, that's the same thing as the reaction is like, if you're doing everything properly to keep your body in tune and healthy, and then when you react, when you get that moment of, I'm tired, I'm frustrated, I'm, in that split second where, like you said, you're not going to be able to go back to the books and you're not going to be able to go back to the references and the studies and the, even if you've been in counseling and go back to that, oh, the counselor said to do this, when that comes up. But at any moment, we're going to hit that moment and just it'll be too much and it'll push over the edge. And then we've got to, wind that hole back and do all the apologies and do all the forgiveness and do all the things, versus being able to recognize that it's happening ahead of time so that we stop it.
Right. and putting in that time up front,
Right.
that investment, right?
Right.
Absolutely. But the key also, and we talk about that in Wellness to Wonderful as well, is what you do is you build the skill sets to be able to also recover and repair more quickly. So it's not about being perfect, because we're not, although we all want to catch it before, so many times we don't. And it's probably the same you see in the athletes. Like the better they're, the more they have their form aligned and the more practice they put and the more investment they put into that, the quicker they can come back on track when they've gone off track. And it's the same thing. You build those skills and you have the tools that say, it's not going to be 2 years before I come back. It's going to be that next moment, that I know how to get back to wonderful.
Right. So, so the difference between wellness, I think a lot of people who think wellness is like the target, and that's a big buzzword over the past few years, is, going away from the healthy mindset to wellness, overall wellness and well-being, but to wonderful. And so why is wonderful not wellness, not happiness, not joyful, not like, why is wonderful different?
Yeah. I think wellness is a great place to be. However, it has almost become connected to kind of a baseline. A lot of people get to wellness right now, or they're managed by pills and procedures. So I no longer have high blood pressure because I'm on a high blood pressure medication. I no longer have high blood sugars because I'm taking insulin, or whatever that is. So wellness is now being managed in this pills and procedure path. And that is not wonderful.
Right.
Right. So we haven't quite optimized our internal systems to work at that level of life is wonderful. We might get to longevity. We might get, a little bit healthier, but we're not experiencing that trio of healthier, longer, happier. And the whole idea of taking you up to wonderful is it begins with that authentic connection to yourself, that ability to start discerning what are my needs and how do I meet them in a way that supports health, longevity, and joy.
And it's also about wellness. The difference for me, I would add to that, is the wellness. A lot of people, it's checking off boxes. Right. I ate the diet. I did my exercise today. I did the stretching. I slept this number of hours. I'm good. Yeah. But it's still about these external markers, right? So it's all about what I should be doing. And wonderful happens when you connect internally to your intrinsic motivation of what are my values, and I'm be able to care for that, tune in, and then take action. So what are my internal values, and can I align my behaviors with those? So if in this moment I'm wanting connection, what action do I take? In this moment I'm wanting nutrition, right? I'm needing food. What action am I going to take to meet that need in a way that's most effective and least costly? If I'm needing movement now, what action am I going to take that aligns with my values most effectively? That's where wonderful lives. And it's hard for people because we grew up in a world that directs us externally. We're good kids because our parents told us we were, not because we aligned with our values. We were good students because our teachers graded us as such, not because we aligned with our values. And we were good workers because our bosses bonused us as such, not because we align with our values. So the question is, how do we reconnect? Because life is wonderful is not about being happy all the time. It's about being self-connected all the time. And even if I'm sad and I'm meeting a need for mourning, which is a universal human need, life can still be wonderful. Or I can be handling that sadness, hiding it all alone, suppressing it, or resisting it. And that, even though I'm sad, life is not going to be wonderful. Similarly, I can be happy and life can be wonderful, or I can be happy and life is not wonderful. There's a lot of people who are really happy when they won the lottery, but life is still not wonderful for them. Right. So to me, life is wonderful is really about that self-connection internally.
And so, and there's a couple of things there. One is that, like, what I'm hearing is that, like, that's a big difference between when you look at somebody and say, oh, well, that person ate horribly or smoked or did whatever, but they lived this long life. Like, how did that happen? And like the doctors are telling me I have to do this, this, and this, and like, but they can look at it and go, well, that person lived that long life. And then, not in my case, but somebody else, like, my dad died at 59 and he did everything right.
Right.
And so then it just becomes like, oh, well, it's just the genes. Right. And I'm like, it's not just the genes. There's other pieces to the puzzle. And I think when we dig down, we realize that person that lived a long life, even though they were doing things that weren't optimizing their health, they were self-connected. They had what they envisioned as a wonderful life for them.
Mm-hmm.
I agree 1,000%. And I mean, granted, there's genes are going to play a little bit of a role, right? Some people can smoke and never get cancer. Some people can not smoke and get lung cancer, right? But on a whole, if it's not the cancer that gets you, it's the heart disease. If it's not the heart disease, it's diabetes. Right. If it's not that, it's an autoimmune disease. There's something that we're going to be susceptible to, regardless of what our genetic profile is. But I think on a whole is, if we can optimize these 9 pillars, our bodies are going to be so robust and resilient that, for an example, and I don't know that person's case, but maybe they do smoke, even though we're not recommending it. Right. And they're able to bypass a lot of the disease because everything else is lined up. Right. I mean, we all can't avoid toxicity in our environment. Sure. We're all going to go into fight or flight. There's environmental contaminants that we're all dealing with on a, there's, foods, hey, we do the best we can. So our body has a natural ability to heal, and it's resilient. And I think the question is, what's that toxic burden that we're putting on our body? Right. And to me, when your 9 pillars are out of balance, that's basically optimizing the toxic burden. Yeah. So all we're doing is giving people a roadmap and a framework from which to tend and reverse that whole system. And right now, I would say the way we live in society today really pulls us off this path of life is wonderful pretty aggressively. So it's going to take a little bit of work, but it's going to get easier over time. And to me, that's a sign that you're on the right path. And it's not about being on the path all the time. It's the ability to know and identify when you veer off, and the skill to be able to get back on. Right.
But I love your example because, in just thinking about that, so within the 9 pillars, somebody who might not be optimizing nutrition, but is self-connected, does activity, plays, connects to their external world with family and friends and community, and gets meaning and purpose from their work, and has a spirituality practice, where they see the world as something greater than just themselves, and they're not alone, and they connect to the natural world. When all of those are aligned, then it just shows how it can impact in the same way that if we just focus on this one and ignore the other 8. Yeah. And that's super, super important.
And so it really is, it's a teamwork of all 9. And just like any other team, you're going to have some that are a little more skilled, that maybe put in a little more effort, right? And so at different times, that's going to be different ones of those. And the idea is just, like you mentioned very early on, it's just to check in on all of them periodically and just know that, like, I'm not completely forgetting one of them. I'm not just ignoring it and it's falling, way behind all the rest of us while the convoy's going down the road towards, longevity.
Yes.
Right. That's, I mean, it's in a nutshell. Yeah. Is that, and what's out of balance for me today, what pillar's off is different than what pillar is going to be off tomorrow. And some days life, I'm going to be pretty in balance and life is going to feel wonderful. And other days they're going to be really off balance and life is not going to feel very wonderful. So it's this dynamic balancing and flow. Yeah. It's not a static destination.
Right.
And I think the cool thing about it too is noticing the positive of it. So as you're tending to the 9 pillars, to see, oh, if I pay attention to this one, look at all the other ones that are impacted positively by that.
And I think it's neat because if you take a step back and look at yourself that way, and this is just what I'm envisioning. So if I'm wrong, correct me. But if I take a step back and look at myself that way, then I'm less likely to judge my neighbor for what they have or don't have, or how they act with the things that they do have that I wish I had, like all of that aspect. Because like, if my life's wonderful, I'm not really sure. There's going to be desires for different things, obviously, but it's not the same as if I'm struggling and I'm in that fight or flight all the time. And I'm just like, oh, if I just had their car, or if I just had their house, or if I just had their job, it brings me back to like, oh, but I've got everything that I need is taken care of. I sure have wants. I would love to have more needs, maybe, but if I'm wonderful, I'm wonderful.
And that to me is the more like comparison is the easiest way to make our lives miserable.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, we all do it.
Right.
So it's a way that we try to communicate with ourselves. But if we can, rather than compare and act on the comparison, can we reconnect to ourselves and our feelings and needs? Mm-hmm. Okay, so when I compare myself to someone else and I'm longing for something, what need is there? And for some people, when they see a nice car, they have this core limiting belief that the more money you have, the more value you have as a person, the more self-worth. All right, so now there's some really deep core work we got to do there versus trying to go after the car, and working even later at night and sacrificing even more with your connection and your health to try and get more money to feed that limiting belief.
Right.
So to me, and it also is a symptom of external motivators versus internal. So if I'm looking at around me to see, am I happy or not? And what I want that I don't have, again, feeds that external measure versus internal. Who cares what's out there? What do I want? Do I want a boat or do I not want a boat? Do I want 4 cars? What need is being met by that strategy of having a boat or 4 cars? Connect to that. And if it's really serving a need, fantastic. And if it's not, then check in around what's motivating me to go in that direction.
Right.
I think also in that mobilized fight or flight state, we step into what's called scarcity mentality. And we talk about that in Wellness to Wonderful as well, where the world becomes contracted. And in our small world, we think more is going to make it better.
Yeah.
And when we can step out of that and into life is wonderful, the world becomes expansive and we're internally connected to our values. And so there's less of that need or, that drive to get that more and more and more. Because we have that internal sense of peace.
Right. And I think that one of the things I was actually thinking about the other day, because my neighbor had something that needed to be done outside, and her son just came home from college for, the summer break. And so he was and he said, yeah, I've got to go get this tool or whatever. And I was thinking, do I have that? Because I could loan it to him and not have him, which made me think about, back in, the pioneer days where it was like you had your homestead. If you didn't have something, you thought, borrowed it from your neighbor or whatever. It wasn't like, oh, let me go buy the next big brand new thing and use it once and put it in the shed and have it sit there. It's like, oh, let me go find the blacksmith because he knows how to do this. I'll get that done and move on. And I think we've lost some of that. And when you were saying that more scenario, that made me think of that. It's like, do we really need all of the things that we have just to take the house first, from a healthcare standpoint, or can we just borrow it from our neighbor the one time a year that we need it?
Yeah.
Right. And that's where there's no right or wrong answer. There's checking into your values and saying, what's going to meet my needs and what's going to meet as many of my needs as possible, most effectively and least costly. Yeah. So yes. Okay. Well, I could get this thing and then it's going to, I have to pay for it. I have to store it. Okay. Or I could borrow it. Okay. So each of those strategies, I could hire somebody else to do it with their own equipment. So there's 3 strategies right there. What's going to meet most of my needs as effectively and least costly as possible. And I think that internal motivation, you said you coach athletes, right? So, that's a big one where, you want to be the best, or do you want to be your best?
Right.
And when you want to be the best, you're dependent on other people, right? Because you're comparing yourself to other people to determine if you are meeting your goals or not, or versus I want to be my best.
Yeah.
And whatever that is, I could beat all the competition, or maybe I can't. But the goal is to focus on being your best, because you're internally motivated at that point.
Yep.
But to even get there requires stepping out of that scarcity mentality, which is I need to amass and accumulate as much for myself as possible to keep myself safe.
Right. And that then also goes back to like that self-identification, that self, like understanding what your core values are, what you're really after, what's going to make you feel the best, make you feel wonderful. What is it that's going to, and that's going to be different for you than from, almost everybody else in the world. Like it's going to be different because we're all different.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is all so important. And it's also so foreign to so many people putting all this together, even though it makes sense when you stop and connect to like, hey, how do I feel when we talk about this? I feel pretty expansive and open. Hopefully people listening will notice that shift in their own bodies.
Right.
And maybe they're a little confused. Okay, well, what do I do if this is it overwhelming to imagine trying to attend all this? I'm barely keeping it together. All right, well, that's where we can support you at WeHeal.health.
Right.
But to me, that's the thing is, hey, just check in and say, hey, is this, because as doctors, when we were doing the diet and lifestyle, the diet change before Forks Over Knives, right? People were like, why are doctors talking about diet so much? You should be talking about pills and procedures.
Right.
And now all of a sudden it's become pretty mainstream to talk about diet.
Yeah.
So now we're dealing with something else. Why are doctors talking about connection?
Yeah.
What's all this about? You should be talking about pills, procedures, and diet, maybe and exercise.
Yeah.
I think we're just a little bit ahead of the curve here,
Yeah.
but connection is going to be so important, not only to healing people individually, but to healing the world.
Yeah.
And I want to just add one thing, because I like what you said. And it made me think the 9 pillars are groundwork for recognizing the needs that need to be met. And then they could meet different people where they are, because the strategies available to you that resonate with you are going to be different than the strategies that resonate with me.
Right.
And there's space for all of that to happen. It makes me think of when kale, became a really big thing and everybody had to eat kale to be healthy, but not everybody likes kale.
Right.
So then you felt like a failure. Well, if I'm not eating kale, I'm not achieving optimal health. And it's like, no, there are a lot of different vegetables. Pick the ones you love and eat as many of those as you can.
Yeah.
So it really allows space for different people to find themselves and provides that framework of where should I even be looking? Right.
Well, and so we're getting close to an hour, and I want to respect your time. And you sort of led into it, Matthew, a little bit with like, if this has resonated with somebody and they're like, okay, I'm feeling that. How do I connect with you? How do I get to more information? How do I take the next step and get help finding these? And where do I get the book? Like, so give us all those ways to connect.
Yes. So you can go to our website, and we have all sorts of resources. We have doctors that are trained. We have trained to support people in this model. We have health mentors that are trained to support people, everything from connection to nutrition and cooking, even trauma recovery, right? We have classes. We have a really, every month we have a nutrition and cooking class that that I lead with our lead nutrition and cooking mentor. She's a chef as well. We have connection classes every month, right? So there's all sorts of support. You can get our book. You can see it on our website. You can get it on Amazon. There's an ebook available as well. Audible is coming out soon. So there's lots of ways to get support. And that's the thing, is that once you identify with this, then it's a matter of just saying, hey, I got the rest of my life. Don't shift into that fight or flight again. Like, oh my God, how am I going to get this all tomorrow? Right. It's about making the connection, starting to tune in and tend to these areas. Imagine I just all of a sudden introduced you to 9 new kids, and you're like, oh my God, how am I going to perfect all these kids? It's like, no, let's round everybody up, do a little check-in, and over time, we're going to be one big happy family.
Right. And I think that's a big thing I was thinking of when you said that, is that the time, like give yourself the time, because if you don't, you're going to go into fight or flight trying to fix yourself. And then and then you're in a circle you really don't want to be in.
Exactly.
So, cool. Well, thank you so much for being guests today.
Oh, thanks for having us. It was great.
Yeah. Thanks for having us. I'm feeling a real sense of resonance with just the way you see things in health and
Awesome.
this,
Thank you.
Yeah. So this is fun.
Good deal.